this lesson is actually less to do with volume profiles itself and more to do with the engine behind the volume profile. So obviously, if you've got access to it, I would recommend that you use it, especially when you're newer to the trading. I think if you are interested in trading, on a naked chart and getting an understanding of what goes in, how these things are kind of calculated, then hopefully this video will give you a quick explanation as to how you'd look and identify volume even by eye. Okay, so in terms of the current chart, let's look at Bitcoin. Obviously, this is quite a hot topic at the moment. It's something we cover a lot in our Discord community, something we do a lot of in terms of trading view as well. So, in essence, what I'm actually looking for is from this move here back down to the low, before obviously the move back up. Right now, there is obviously an argument for this one here, but I like this based on the high back to a low. So for me, this is where I'm interested in terms of a value area. We've obviously got the all-time high. So what I'm actually aiming for is a range from here to there and obviously back again, okay? So what I'll do is I'll make this a little bit lighter. So that's my area of interest, as I call it. And this area of interest is what I'm looking to identify some volume, obviously, inside. Okay, so for me, first things first, I'm going to be looking for consolidation clusters. So we clearly have a nice little cluster along the bottom here. I'll just make this one a bit darker again. So we have a nice consolidation cluster along the bottom there. We have another little cluster which is going to start probably from the tops of these candles here and down to the bottom there. We then have quite a lot of information that we can gather in and around this region, and I'm going to extend that slightly further out, knowing that we're on the lower side of this, okay? So straight away on the lower side of that, I'm going to be looking for a move, first of all, in and around this area. So I'm going to drop down, like I said, slightly underneath the halfway line there, and that really is what I would class as the first point of control, okay? Then the price clearly drops down. Now, at this stage, there's not really much action there until we get back to this key level. Okay, so I'm going to use just the halfway line there. Now we can clearly see prices come down, tested it, rejected, straight back up to this one, and obviously back down, clustering again before falling through. And I'm going to look at this and say, well, okay, did this act as a potential floor? Well, yes, it did. So now I'm looking for, again, the next kind of consolidation cluster. I'm going to come from the top of these bodies here, and obviously not take the wicks because it clearly failed up and above there. You can see again on this candle here the same thing, and obviously draw this down, all the way in. So we've now got some areas of interest. The next thing you need to identify is how much interest, right? How much price action moved around. These are auction areas in essence, and how much the price moved and dropped and played around in and around these areas, okay? So we clearly have this move over here. It's acting as a support. It obviously has fallen through, but now bounced back off. So I'm going to look at the kind of cluster and think to myself, we're on the top of this cluster here, and I'm looking at where most of the volume sat down through, which is probably in this one. So what I'll do is I'll change this to a different color, and that really is kind of the hot spot. Okay, so we then have from there, I'm going to use the center. That's just a little tool, a little trick that I've used, to identify the kind of key areas, which on this particular point, I'm looking at a potential point of control, roughly where we are, a value area, probably again similar, so from here to here, which means I could probably take it a little bit higher, probably have a value area that looks more this as a whole, and therefore main point of control, I'm thinking down around the current region. We've got a clear area of now resistance to come back through, which is going to be around the 47, 47.5 level, and then the major resistance before even thinking of a new all-time high around the 57,000 level. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll stick the volume profile on, the fixed range here. I'll come obviously from the swing low up to the swing high, and then obviously all the way across. So for me, clearly we are on the money in terms of the point of control. It's not that far out. It's good enough in terms of doing this by eye. We also have a high volume area here, which was identified with obviously the red band there. Now, you can see the logic as to why this has fallen back down. We also have the second point of control, is what I would use, I'll call this, um, which maybe can come down a little bit lower in alignment with this particular level here, but you get the general idea. And obviously, if I use that as a 50% marker, it's probably more to do with a fake out and back down, and then consolidating there. So you can refine them obviously, but like I said, this is more of how to identify them and what goes in to identifying them. So you can see that's pretty accurate. Okay, now although you might ask, well, why not just use the volume tool? I'm not suggesting that you don't. I'm saying this is all about what goes in to the actual tool itself, how it's actually calculated, why it's calculated. And when you get used to this, you can actually see that you don't really need the volume put on because it's all written in the price action. So that's the general gist. Now, just to show you that this isn't something that I've memorized and hey, here's 3 or 4 kind of key levels. Let me flick across to something like Ethereum. That's obviously the next larger traded tool and instrument. So a similar thing, just to show you and prove kind of the point. We're going to look at obviously the last major swing low up to the last major swing high. I'll change the color on this in a second. So, there's my actual range. This is what I'm actually looking for overall. I'll make this a little bit light. This was easier to work on. So this is what I'm looking for as a whole. Similar thing, I'm looking for value area, value ranges. So clearly there's a little bit of information. Let's change this back to pink. So there's a little bit of information sitting in and around this level. And I'm just going to go through the same motion. I'm going to go left to right and kind of work out these angles. We then have another little dart in and around there. We have obviously a slightly bigger one sitting in here before another move up, which I think is obviously sitting up and around there. And then we have a lot of information in and around there and dragging that all the way down. So for me, clear as day, we've got a value area as a whole that I'd like to say is probably coming down something like this. We've actually got a couple of key spikes and points, but I think the value area there, and then I'm going to look at refining this inner box. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I can see first of all we've had 2 rejections in the wicks. We've had a nice strong move up, but a very strong move back down. Again, similar thing. So definite resistance there at these key levels, which means this is going to be the first area of interest. We've obviously come back down. We've got a couple of wicks, a strong body, couple of wicks, strong body, couple of wicks, strong body, and therefore this is quite likely to be quite a heavy area of interest as a whole. So I'll just get rid of this, right? We then have a interesting level up high. We have probably a point of control. I'm going to say it probably where we are right now in terms of price, probably in and around this region. We've obviously got another area of interest. I'm going to say probably at the 50% market. Now, the only thing that's going to convince me otherwise is how much of that is sitting on there. So that's probably down slightly lower there, and therefore I've got a couple of interesting key areas in and around here. Okay, so for me to start with, this is how I'd be identifying kind of key levels. So area of interest, clear point of control at the current price right now, and obviously another interesting area up high once the price is broken above the 2360 level roughly. And obviously, if we can stay above this 2170, then obviously, these are going to be the challenge areas first before we grab any liquidity up and around the 29. So again, if I stick this on from the swing low up to the high and obviously all the way across, then again, pretty much on the current price where we are is the current price, point of control. Um, we got a value area, which is obviously a little bit higher, I identified here, and a little bit lower. You can see there the grade area. So it should have actually been up one and down one, um, as a whole. But that's not enough to worry about. And then we've actually got this particular interesting area, like I said, strong level of resistance coming through on the second level. So for me, I'd like to see, not any long positions until after we broke this 23, let's just say 2350. We've obviously got a nice little cluster sitting up here, but actually the low volume or the high volume there is here. Low volume followed through. So yeah, key levels. This one for me, not really interested in. Although it's kind of a high spike, the price action didn't give me anything of interest. So I'm going to take this one out. Um, and therefore, overall, what I'd like to see is a nice consolidation underneath this key level and almost staying maybe between these boxes here a little bit longer, maybe a dip down back to the low before obviously a move back up. Now, if I was to take this one, I think we're going to see something like this as a whole. So, like I said, this video is just for showing what goes into the volume calculations and how you can do this by eye without using the tool. Now, like I said at the start of the video, it's not a replacement tool. It's not going to be as accurate as, but you can clearly see the logic as to what goes into the volume itself. So, yeah, I hope this one helps.